welcome to Yesterday and Today. This is a brand new podcast where young people of today listen to music, classic music from yesterday, and tell us what they think. My name is Mohammed Nizam. I'm a guitarist, a composer, a writer living in London. It's August 2021. And the idea for this came about because I'm sure we've all heard people say things like, music today, it was better in my day, that kind of thing. Now, we all associate music of our youth with all the great experiences of our teenage years, first dances, first kisses, etc., etc. All those amazing moments before the calamity of adulthood took over our lives. But I realised that there is something unique about the music that was made roughly from the early 60s, give or take a few years, to roughly the early 80s, give or take a few years. Something that seems to echo down the generations and inspire people and still provide a bedrock of some kind of almost like the canon of what rock, pop, jazz, soul and progressive music are meant to be. So I decided to ask some young people that I know who are either current students of mine, ex-students, or children of close friends, to listen to some classic albums and give us their views, which will be separated from all those nostalgic memories. So do those albums still sound great in this day and age? We're going to be looking at some absolute classics that you will know really, really, really well. And we are going to start with an album that the young people taking part chose themselves. And we're going to meet them in a minute. But here's the first album that we're going to look at, and it's an absolute legend. See you on the other side. And here we are. Okay, I'm going to introduce everyone taking part the way they appear to me on my screen. So first of all, we've got Max. Say hello, Max.
Hello.
And then we've got Maya. Hello, Maya. And then we have Madeline.
Hey.
And finally, we've got Shane. Hi, Shane.
Hi.
We're going to start off by hearing what they think about that classic album by the Beatles called Abbey Road. An absolute stone cold legendary album, which almost everybody who's watching this podcast or listening to it will probably know or will have heard of, or may even know really, really, really well. So there was a little bit of a discussion about who would start things off, and I think Shane won. Is that right, Shane?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. So Shane, first of all, just what were your kind of initial thoughts about Abbey Road? Is it an album that you had already known before this, or was it something that was completely new to you?
Yeah. So obviously, I've heard "Here Comes the Sun" and a few other songs in the album, but I don't think I ever took the time to just like sit down and listen to it all the way through. And I mean, I really enjoyed it for what it was. You know, I thought it was a good, like, I think it's probably one of the best introductions to kind of the Beatles and their style of music. I thought that, you know, that they go through a lot of different kind of styles and genres inside the album, and I think that you know, it's worth it to listen to. I think, you know, it's quite long. It's about 45-ish minutes. I'm not sure because I listened to the remastered version or something like that. I think it had some extra songs on the end, but I thought, yeah, it was a good listen.
Okay, and were there any? I am listening to you, but I am also taking notes and reading things as we go along, just so I can fill in some of the blanks. Were there any tracks that really stood out for you that you weren't already familiar with?
Yeah, so the ones that it's kind of like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Old Darling, and Octopus Garden were kind of the three big ones which I was like, oh, I haven't heard these ones before. The rest of them, I'd known of them. Those ones were, I think, the main ones.
That's interesting, actually, because I think Octopus's Garden was actually a hit single at the time. I may be wrong about that. We'll do a little bit of checking up on facts later on. But yes, the big ones were Here Comes the Sun and Something.
Yeah.
Those were really big at the time, and they've become kind of perennials, haven't they? Okay, so has anybody got any questions to ask? I don't see any hands up. So I guess that means that we can move on. Just on the whole, Shane, were there any? What were your favourite? I mean, if there was one song that you could name as your favourite, which one would that be?
The thing is, the probably either Come Together or Something were my favorite ones to listen to, but deciding between them, I like them for like a lot of different reasons. You know, I thought that Come Together was a great kind of instrumental and like a really strong opener. I think one thing that stood out to me in all of the songs was how good the bass lines were, like, and it, you know, it was really well mixed. It was prominent that I could hear at least. And you know, I'm pretty sure, wasn't it Paul McCartney that was playing bass?
Yeah.
On the
Now,
album.
yeah. So Paul was the bass player in the band. I think one of the things about the Beatles is they swapped quite a lot. And there may be some discussion. I'll do a little bit of looking up on things. There may have been some swapping of instruments. They did eventually, as they progressed towards the mid to late 60s, they brought other musicians in to play certain things. But I get a feeling that that Paul's actually playing Come Together, and he might even be playing, he may be playing Something. But you're right, the bass is really prominent. It's prominent in a way that it's kind of not anymore in contemporary music.
Yeah, I thought that, like, for the style, it wasn't so. It was more common, you know. Like, I guess nowadays the bass is kind of just in the mix, really low down, just providing like a sub. But it was like a lot more melodic and than kind of you'd expect.
Yeah, that you could actually do a whole session on Paul McCartney's bass lines as he progressed through his solo career and Wings. His bass playing really became quite funky. Okay, Shane, we're going to move on because I'm a little bit aware about time. We're all going to have an opportunity to talk again later and ask questions. Who was next? I don't remember.
I think I was second.
Okay, Maya. So I am going to repeat some of the same questions. So what were your overall kind of feelings, your first impressions? Did you know the album already? Were you familiar with some of the tracks?
Yeah, I was definitely familiar before with Here Comes the Sun, because that's like the most famous one, but I actually had listened to the album as a whole, like back in the first lockdown, and so I was familiar with the album. And like I really like the album. It's very, as Shane said, there's a bunch of mix of genres in there, and it's not, you cannot define it as one genre. It's very, like, I can't pinpoint what it is exactly, and so it's very like there's ballads and there's more upbeat songs and there's all different kinds, so you go through like a journey in the album.
You know, Abbey Road, the studio after which the album is named, is a legendary place. So many bands have recorded there, and the Beatles and music generally by this time, the mid '60s, was beginning to experiment with what the studio could actually do. In fact, some artists refer to the studio as another member of the band. So you were saying, Maya, that you'd already listened to it before the lockdown. What brought it to your attention originally?
I don't remember what brought it to my attention, but I just wanted to listen to a bunch of albums as a whole. And so I thought I would listen to more of the Beatles and other people like Dire Straits. And so Abbey Road is like the classic one. So I decided to listen to it.
Okay. And are there any songs, if there was one song that you could pick, because I know the one that I would pick. If there was one song that you could pick from this album, what would it be?
It's the one that's I Want You.
You so heavy, that one.
Yeah.
Right, okay, that's interesting because that's not a song that I'm really that familiar with. I'll have to really give that a good listen. Okay, are there any no raised hands, no questions, nothing? Okay, all right. So this is really interesting so far because for those of you who are watching or listening, the whole idea behind this is to ask people, young people today, whether the music to find out whether the music affects them and inspires them in the same way that it inspired people who were actually in their teens or in their early 20s or even in their early teens at the time that the albums came out. So the question of inspiration is going to come up again later. But right now we're going to move on to, I believe it's Maddy. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Maddy. So same questions. What were your, what's the overview? What's the general feeling behind the album for you?
I was actually quite surprised with the album, to be honest, because I mean, I think as everyone's kind of said, it's really a very iconic album. Like, I think everyone pretty much has heard of it, or at least seen the cover, or at least has heard Here Comes the Sun. I think that was, again, like the main one that I think I knew beforehand. And I mean, it's not the kind of music I'd usually listen to. I tend to go for, I don't know, like some of the lyrics, I think, to me, dare I say it, I feel like were a bit like nonsensy, quite. And I was a bit, and I liked that in a few songs, but in some of them I was a bit like, what is going on? Which was interesting, because I think it makes you want to research further into the songs. But I think there were times where I was a bit like, I'm very confused right now with what they are saying. Which yeah.
Can you give me an example of one of those?
That's a good question. I think when I first heard Maxwell's Silver Hammer, that was the first one I was like, eh. But I can't think of any of those off the top of my head. I mean, Mr. Mustard as well, that one at the end as well, I was like, okay, that's where we're going now. Because I think, as I think Shane said, like, and Miami as well, there were lots of different genres. So it kind of jumped around quite a lot, which was interesting, because I think it also allowed me to find the ones that I liked more and the ones that I didn't. But yeah.
And aside from the impenetrability of the lyrics,
no,
was
don't spin it the wrong way around.
Was there one particular tune that stood out for you that maybe you hadn't heard before, or?
I would say Golden Slumbers, or as same as Maya, actually, I Want You, I liked that one.
Ah, okay. All right, interesting. Right, Max. So
Yeah.
again, same question to start with. General overview. What was your feeling? Were you already familiar with this album? Or was it completely new to you?
I was reasonably familiar with it. Well, basically because I have a bunch of friends whose parents all put it on, and if we go to parties and stuff at people's houses, you sort of, the parents will come down later on and they'll put their music on, and it's quite nice. So I was pretty familiar with it already. Saying that though, I hadn't really listened to the full album before. I was a bit like Shane. I'd take a second and I listened to the whole thing, and differently to Maddy, I actually quite liked the fact that some of them didn't need to make perfect sense in my head, because it was just nice music. And I think especially Maxwell's Silver Hammer, that was one of the songs that I'd never really heard before, I don't think. And it was quite, I don't know, it was quite just quite relaxing in a way, I guess. Like, it's something new, something bold, I guess, in that way, which I quite liked.
And is there a particular favourite? Could you name one song that you absolutely can't live without on Abbey Road?
Come Together, only because of the fact that there's so many bands and stuff are redoing it nowadays. So it's still a part of society. Like, it was in been in a bunch of films. It's been in a whole load of things, and it's like, even if you listen to it with the Beatles, there's also the remixes with different bands who have done it, which is quite nice. So I say that one.
Okay, this is really interesting, because what I'm hearing is that the general feeling is that there's a lot of variety, stylistic variety on the album. And that leads me to this question, which I'm going to ask all of you. Same question to all of you, one by one. The question is, the way albums were consumed up to maybe 15 years ago was that you listened to them all the way through. So there was track one, you'd play side one on vinyl to the end of side one, then you'd flip the vinyl over and listen to side two, and you wouldn't skip anything. You'd hear everything in the order. So the order that tracks were placed on an album was very, very. There was a lot of thought put into this by most of the bands who were doing it in those days. So the whole idea is it's meant to be a journey. So did you feel that there was a journey involved in this album? Because when I asked you to do this, the whole idea was that you would give it time, you'd listen to it in the headphones. So you got the production and the stereo spectrum, which all these artists work very hard at, and the orchestration and the kind of ideas. But did you get a sense of a journey when you were listening to it? Max, can I start with you with that one?
Yeah, I don't think so really. I didn't feel like there was. I mean, obviously there would be one, but I couldn't pick up on one myself. I didn't think there was so much of like, there's this song when then that song perfectly leads on from that into the next song. I didn't exactly feel like that was sort of the way I listened to it in that way.
Okay, and Maya, what did you think about the journey? Did it take you on a journey?
Yeah, a bit, especially because like tracks from like 11 to like 15, they're like continuing on, they're the same song. You don't realize that you've changed to another song, like because
I was
it's
gonna go with that.
continuing on. And so yeah, it was very continuous. I mean, I think in the beginning there was a bit of like a shift because like Maxwell, Silverhammer, and Octopus Garden, they're more upbeat, and then you go to I Want You, which is a bit more like, I don't know, like there's a lot of bass and it's not at the same style. But then towards the end, it's like one continuous song.
Yeah.
It's very long.
Okay, and Maddy, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say when I was listening to it through, I as well sat down and listened to it as a full album. And when it was, I think around Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam, those songs when they switched, I literally did not even realize, like I didn't clock that it was a different song until I looked and I was like, oh, and then I had to go back and listen again to actually split them up and like look at them properly. But there definitely was a journey. I wouldn't say it was like a set like a specific journey. I feel like it was more like just personally what I think you take from each song. I don't think they were necessarily supposed to all be interlinked, but I like how they weren't interlinked, I guess. Like how there was a bit of styles. I think that's what kind of made it a different kind of journey.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And Shane, what did you think? Was there a journey involved? Was there?
I mean, I thought kind of a similar thing. So what for the kind of longer songs up until Sun King, because those ones were quite kind of longer. It felt like, oh, here's an individual song, and then whilst they kind of shifted in moods, like the first, like Come Together and Something were like kind of moody, and then Maxwell Silverhammer, Old Darling, and Octopus Garden were kind of like a bit more fun. Then it went back to being like really serious. Then it was fun with Here Comes the Sun, and then kind of when the songs, as they were getting shorter, it almost felt like, those were the songs which I felt like you can't just listen to them by themselves because it's like 1 minute long. It's kind of, they have aspects, they're all unique and they work by themselves, but I think it's kind of better to listen to them all in one continuous go, because it doesn't feel like you're listening to 20 minutes of music. It feels like you're listening to like everyone else said, just one continuous song, and it's just like, it almost felt like they were messing about and then just decided, oh, let's just record it like short snippets of stuff that we wanted to do.
Well, it is interesting what you're saying, because and I've noticed that Madeline has a question. We'll come to that in a sec, Mads. But it's interesting the kind of context in which albums like this were made. It's 1969, and this was the kind of the tail end of what they call flower power, the hippie movement, which primarily existed in America. In England, it was kind of swinging Carnaby Street. And a bit more of the hippie kind of thing taking over around the late 60s in England. And of course, along with that came, the whole youth culture explosion. There was clothes, there was fashion, there were other elements to that time which were more of a hedonistic nature, let's say, without getting too far into it. But those things had a lot to do with possibly the stream of consciousness that maybe Maddy was talking about in terms of lyrical content. Stream of consciousness is stuff, or nonsense prose or nonsense poetry is stuff that kind of doesn't really have to make sense. And it's really interesting that this period of time found artists as prominent as the Beatles. They were household names already, legendary household names, taking the kind of risks and the kind of experiments that that they did on albums like this and a couple of albums beforehand as well. The White Album is a really big one for them, where they were experimenting. And the whole idea of sort of nonsense lyrics. I mean, Maddy, have you ever heard of a song called I Am the Walrus? Do you know that one?
No.
Okay, so that is a Beatles album. Sorry, a Beatles track, earlier than Abbey Road, I think. And it might be interesting for you all to go and listen to that and try and figure out what the lyrics are about. Maddy, you had a hand up. I'm also aware that we are going to get cut off in a minute, but we'll go to the second link. So Maddy, you had your hand up and wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to say, when Shane was saying about how obviously you can listen to the songs individually, I think because of, again, as you said, like the nature of the time, how you used to listen to albums straight all the way through, I don't really think you can listen to them individually. Like, I don't think it would be have as much of an effect if they were singular songs, which obviously they are, but I think the way that it was made and like intended to be listened to, I think that that's kind of how it should still be, even with us having the ability to skip. But,
good
yeah.
point. Yeah.
And also, just adding on to that, when you were saying about how they just decided to have a bit of fun and just make like one long track with like those last few songs, I was googling up about like Me, Mr. Mustard when I was very confused on what was going on, and John Lennon, I don't know if I can say this on here, but he just called it Finished Bits of Crap. I thought that was kind of, yeah, I just thought that was quite relevant.
John Lennon is a really interesting character, actually. I mean, I'm sure you all know that he was shot in 1980 outside his apartment building by a fan, you know. But he was. There was a little bit of a split in the Beatles. We're gonna get cut off in a minute. As soon as we get cut off, wait and then go to that second link, because that starts at 2:45. So we've got 5 minutes between the links. But there was a kind of perceived difference between the kind of songs that John Lennon wrote and the kind of songs that Paul McCartney wrote. Paul McCartney wrote very moving, beautiful, and quite uplifting songs. John Lennon tended to write songs that were possibly a bit more introspective and thoughtful, and actually quite tender and vulnerable. So he wrote a fantastic song called Help, which when you look at the lyrics, it's just literally him saying, I can't handle it, someone give me a hand. And I have a lot of theories, which one day I'll expound about why a certain type of man expresses himself in music in a way that he cannot do in his real life. Some of the other songs to maybe check out by John Lennon are Jealous Guy, which is a beautiful song, and Woman, which is about his relationship with Yoko Ono. We could go on for hours about the Beatles and the stories. It's just so rich. Let's quit here, come back on the second link. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you, Maddy, for this T-shirt, which was a birthday present to me. It actually says, I might look like I'm listening to you, but in my head, I'm playing my guitar.
I thought it was very funny.
And that's absolutely true, 24/7 about me. Okay, that's part one done. See you for part two in a minute.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, great. All right, welcome back. So now I'm gonna ask you guys for a couple of other questions. I'm going to throw them out. There's a great deal for people who maybe grew up with this stuff and heard it at a very formative point in their lives. There's a lot of emotion connected to these songs. And generally with music, I think that's what happens. You hear certain music when you're at a certain point in your life, normally around your early teens, into your mid-teens, into your early 20s, where things have a massive emotional impact. 2 questions. Did anything really move you emotionally on the album? And did anything inspire you as a musician, as a player, as an aspiring musician? Did anything inspire you to learn, or was there a song you'd like to learn? Does anybody want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think with me, like emotional impact for music, it's a lot more like kind of, oh, I really love listening to this song and it makes me feel happy, than, oh, you know, this song's made me feel really sad, or this song's made me like, you know, I think the only music which has made me think about myself has been when I listen to classical music, like piano music, but that's kind of just because it kind of comes with the music, I guess. But in terms of being inspired, I mean, like Max was saying, you know, earlier on, that there's a lot of covers that people have done of especially Come Together, Here Comes the Sun, and like Something, you know, and it's always interesting to listen to those, because you kind of get, you know, there are the people who are really faithful, and you know, they'll play it as it was on the recording, but I almost find that it's more fun to listen to the people that kind of try to take it a bit more out there, and so I think, you know, it probably inspired me to just hopefully somehow form a band and get, like, you know, doing cover stuff doesn't have to be always really serious, and you can have fun with it. And I think the kind of popularity of the Beatles allows for that, because people will enjoy listening to it purely because of the name, rather than, you know, if you play some really obscure song, it's going to be, you know, people might not enjoy it as much as the Beatles, I think. So you can, you know, you have that kind of ability to mess around with it a bit and do your own thing, and I think that's cool.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting, actually. Anybody else want to talk about being moved, feelings that you might have, or inspirations? Anybody want to say something?
Yeah, I think for like emotions and being moved, like I don't usually like relate that much when it comes to like those classic albums and everything, but they make me feel happy, like Shane said, and also when it's like a very good guitar in it or good bass and stuff, it makes you feel powerful. It makes you like you want to listen to it, and like the music itself is inspirational to like especially like being a musician, to want to learn those things and to like improve. And because like even though I love music now, there's not much different about it. It's just 4 chords and then so,
Well,
mostly.
yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting thing for someone of your age to say, because this is actually part of the, you know, this is the reason that we're kind of doing this, is to find out why music from that era, from kind of like the early 60s up to kind of like the early 80s, why that 20-year period was so enduringly influential, you know. So for you guys to collectively to have picked a Beatles album as the first album to look at is actually really significant. You know, why does that music still speak to people? The Beatles and musicians and film stars were the celebrities of those days. TV hadn't developed that celebrity angle to quite the level that music and films had. So the Beatles were really like, you know, tabloid fodder. And it's very interesting, or it's going to be interesting for you guys to follow the thread of George Harrison's relationship with the woman he wrote Something about and for. His name is Pattie Boyd. She was one of the big British models in the 60s, and her shadow is going to be she casts a very long shadow over the story of British rock and popular music going into the 70s. So we will come back to that story because it's really big. And for me, Something is an incredibly moving song for me. There is an element about music that you kind of bring, the listener brings as much to that to the listening experience as the person who wrote and performed the music. And I think what you were saying, Shane, about songs making you feel happy, and you don't really listen to songs that give you the feeling of melancholy. They say that you won't really understand love songs until you've had your heart broken, because that's nearly what all love songs are about, is having your heart broken. Okay, does anybody want to say anything else? Anybody got anything to say, or questions maybe?
Yeah, I mean, with kind of like what you're saying about emotions from the album and kind of like feeling moved, for me particularly, like I tend to listen to music, like I listen to music more for the lyrics typically. Like that's kind of that's where if I'm going to feel moved by something, it's usually by the lyrics, not the actual music. And I think with this album, that was actually what was different for me this time, because as I said, to me, some of the lyrics were a bit nonsensy at times. So, but it was the actual music that I loved, and that's what I kind of was moved more by, which I found really interesting, because typically that's not the case, possibly because, as Maya said, most things nowadays are just like 4 chords or a simple melody. So I think that was quite interesting in that respect.
Yeah, so I don't know how much you know about the history of the Beatles, but they started out as a working band when they were kids, teenagers, in the late 50s, early 60s. They actually were just earning money in Hamburg in Germany. They'd gone over as 4 or 5, I think at that time, there were 5 of them. And they were playing clubs in Hamburg. They were doing 3-hour sets a night, and it was just all about getting people dancing and entertaining people. But at the same time, what they were doing was they were learning how to write songs because the early Beatles were a covers band. So they were learning how to write songs by playing other people's songs and by learning the classic songwriting formulas and techniques. And of course, when I think I may have mentioned to some of you, I don't know how much you know about things like If I Fell, which is one of the most beautiful songs from the early days. That song has got so many lovely chords in it, lots of movement in the chords. But then they did stuff like I Saw Her Standing There, which is just really 3 or 4 chords. So they had this down. They had the rock and roll energy, immediate kind of hooks. And then they had this very, very unique at the time ability to write very moving and interesting songs. And the other thing about the Beatles, which is really important, is that they were one of the first artists who wrote their own songs. If you go back before the Beatles, the huge artists who were mainly singers didn't write their own songs. Elvis Presley never wrote one of his own songs. It was always done by other people. I mean, we could talk about the Beatles a lot, couldn't we? About all the ins and outs. Are there any final? Am I right in saying that we're kind of coming to the end? Do I get that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think talking about what you were saying, and I think what both Maya and Maddy said, that today's music is like, sometimes I say that it's formulaic, but I think that the reason why music changed in that way, I guess I think it's I guess something to do with how people listen to it nowadays, is that they don't I think you were saying that you used to go around to your mate's house and just like you'd sit around in a circle with like 5 or 6 of you and just listen to the whole thing. People now listen to it kind of more on their own, and they want the music to give them an emotion rather than allowing the music to give them an emotion. They kind of they might search for songs which are a very specific type of emotion that they want to hear, because they might want, like, I don't know. Whereas I guess you can't really do that with this the Beatles or this album specifically, or any like kind of great album. You just have to soak it in yourself, and go into it with a clear mind. And I think that, you know, sometimes, I don't know, people just don't do that, and it's kind of a shame because
Well,
they spent a lot. Yeah, they spent a lot of time trying. Sorry, they spent a lot of time trying to create something that was, you know, interesting, and people would be last. It had a lasting impact on people, I think.
yeah. Well, you know, the Beatles were. I've just done a little bit of research. This is a little bit later than I thought it was. Actually, it's 1969. I thought it was maybe 67, 68. But you know, they were the people who set the tone for that generation. If you were maybe 10, 11 or 12 when you first heard Please Please Me or I Want to Hold Your Hand, you effectively grew up with the Beatles your whole life. And you changed with them. You know, when they grew their hair long and started experimenting with various avenues of hedonism, you were probably doing the same thing, you know. So yeah, okay. And I think Maya had her hand up. Maya, did you want to say something?
Yeah, am I right to say that like now, because people don't, well, not everyone, but like most people don't sit down and just listen to music as an like activity. You know, it's like played in the background, or it's like when you're on the transport, or when you're like with hanging out with people and you need to like listen to music. And I feel like because with old albums like this, you really want to sit down and like pay attention to everything that's being like played and being said. And then now music is more like, yeah, of course there's like good lyrics and there's good music and you want to listen to it, but it's more of like an easy listening that you want to put in the background. And it's like, because people like, life now is more fast paced, and so I feel like the music changed with like how people live their lives now, because everything is like there's more things to do. It's not an activity anymore to just sit down, listen to a full album. Like,
Yeah, this goes back to this thing that, again, maybe I've said to you guys individually, which that, you know, when I was 12 or 13, you had hobbies, and those hobbies were what you did. And your hobby, you know, you were either a sporty person and you did that as a hobby, or you were a bike person, or you were a builder of Meccano and models and things, or you were a outdoors woodworky person. And that's what you did in your spare time. So if you're a music person who's really into music, they were the kind of slightly strange ones. They were not normally great at sports.
But your generation wasn't, Mo. Was that your generation, the strange ones?
I think Max, there are strange ones in every generation. So yes, you're right, Maya. The way music is consumed is really, really, really different. And I think one of the interesting things for me and people like me is going to be how you guys find listening to things in their entirety. You know, and the good thing is that most of the albums before kind of 1983, 1984 are going to be on vinyl, and that means they're going to be no more than about 40 minutes, because vinyl can't hold, or couldn't hold, much more information than that before sound started degrading. There are some albums that have longer running times on vinyl, but the majority of albums were, you know, roughly 37 to 40, maybe 42 minutes long. Maddy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, again, with Maya, about how nowadays, yeah, you don't listen to music as an activity. Like, I don't think that's, and I think it's quite sad that we don't do that, because I feel like, especially with like this album, I think there are some pieces of work that you kind of have to sit and listen to. Like, I don't think you can do it as like a moving process. Like when I first listened to this before the podcast, I did it when on my way to work on the train, and I couldn't properly I could concentrate on it as I would with normal music, but I actually had to then, when I got home, I listened to it just lying in bed, because it was easier to actually put it in more. And I think that again, like the fast-paced world we live in, and kind of how you need to make the time for these kind of albums. Like music nowadays is very quick, very easy listening, as we were saying.
Yeah.
Also what Shane said about people searching for like a feeling or like going after. I'm guilty of doing that. When I go for music, I tend to think, right, what's on my sad playlist today? Let's go listen to that now, or let's go listen to, like, I tend to go for that kind of approach. And I think with what I've realized with like these kind of albums, like especially with Abbey Road, I don't think you can have that approach to a lot more music now, especially when there's such a variety of emotions and genres and stuff.
Yeah. Well, again, something that I'm sure you guys probably don't fully comprehend the importance of this. You know, you spent your spare money on buying albums. You'd actually have to go out and buy an album. Go into it, you have to get out of bed, go to a shop, interact with a human being, give them money that either you'd manipulated out of your parents via pocket money or worked for, and then that person would give you an album, you know, this or a single. A lot of people actually couldn't afford albums. They'd have to start with singles, which is why singles were so important. Okay, I think we're coming to the end. So the final question from me is marks out of 10. Can I ask you to, it's going to be very, I can imagine this is going to be very controversial. So can I ask, I'm going to go around the screen the way it is. Yeah.
Can I just, because I'm being nosy, can I also like know what everyone's like favorite and least, like we've done favorite, like what their least favorite one was as well?
Oh, least favorite track. Okay, who wants to start that one?
Sorry, that's just me being.
Mine is a bit controversial because I actually really don't like Maxwell's Silver Hammer.
Agreed.
I can't stand it.
That's not controversial, I wouldn't say. I would say it's just a certain taste that you might like it. I wouldn't say it's controversial.
Yeah, taste is so individual, isn't it? That's a very good point, Max. It's so down to the person. But possibly what Maya means is that because these tracks are kind of thought of as legendary classics that whole generations have grown up with, to not like something could be seen as controversial, and I think that's fine. There are plenty of things that that society loves that I find incredibly distasteful, especially when it comes to movies and actors and not so much music. I can handle music that's not great, but certain actors. Anyway, it's not about me. Okay. So Maddy, you asked the question, what's your least favorite track?
Yeah, I was going to say Maxwell's Silver Hammer too, or there was one, Oh Darling. I liked Oh Darling, but there were certain points in it that, and I think I found it interesting, but there are certain points where I think it actually hurt my ears to listen to, but I think that was just the way that it was like that was just the way it is, and which is what I like about it because it made it more interesting, but it was a bit like, oh, what is that noise? Like I kind of prefer the more flowy, like, yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, Max, any least favorite tracks?
I mean, I liked it, but I guess Here Comes the Sun, just because of how often you'd hear it and stuff. Only, I mean, I like pretty much all the songs on the album. It's just you hear it so often in adverts or on the radio on some stations. So I'd probably say that one.
That's interesting, actually.
That's controversial, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because what you're sort of saying is that the level of sort of familiarity that we have as a culture with that particular song almost dilutes the impact of it, because you're hearing it in so many different ways. Whereas actually when if you had been, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, when that album came out, that was absolutely brand new and you would never have heard anything like it. And that's partly why it would have blown your mind. That's really interesting. Okay, Shane, any least favorite tracks?
I would say, I don't know, probably Octopus's Garden or Oh Darling. It's not that I didn't like them, it's just that they were kind of annoying to listen. It wasn't annoying to listen to, it was just a bit too I don't know. I mean, I liked listening to them the first time, but then when I listened to them another time, I was like, right, I'm bored of this. I wanna listen to something else now. So I think it's kind of you know, all of the songs were great on a first listen, but for a continuous listen, I think those two were the ones that I kind of just almost found to be just a bit like kind of annoying. But
Yeah, just to let you know, Octopus's Garden was written by Ringo. I'm pretty sure it was a single. I'll do a bit more. I'll do a bit more research on that, and then maybe put some notes in the final epilogue that I'm going to do at some point. Okay, so last thing, marks out of 10. Let's just start with Maddy. Marks out of 10, Maddy.
Me, thing is, it depends on how, again, like as Shane said, like listening to it the first time, I really liked it, but when I went back to it, there were some songs that I think, because some of them are shorter, it was easier, but some of them I was a bit like, right, I've had the initial wow of it, and now it's like, oh, would I actually listen to it again in my own time? Especially because of, again, how we consume music nowadays. If I'm on the tube listening to it, I've told you this before, Mo, with quite a lot of songs, I don't think I could listen in my earphones walking around, but it is the sort of album that if it was played in like a communal setting, like as Max said, at like parties when the parents come down, I think then I would enjoy it a lot more. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it does depend. I'd say like, I'm gonna go like a 6.9, 7.
Okay. All right. Good.
That's
fine.
Coming up to set that's good. Okay, Maya.
That's yeah.
Marks out of 10.
Like a 7.5 because it's not a no skip album, but I do love I love most of the songs on it.
Okay, 7.5. They're doing well so far. Max, what's your marks out of 10?
I'd say about an 8 out of 10. I'd
Okay,
say.
good. Okay, and Shane, what's your marks out of 10?
yeah, around a 7, I'd say 7, like nearing on 8. I think the first listen, it was probably like an 8 or a 9, but then listening to it again, it was kind of just, you know, I'd say 7, solid 7.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting because, you know, I mean, as I'm sure this is why I came up with this idea, because again, people who were in their teens and part of that peer group when this album came out, this is going to be like their favorite album ever. But you guys are 50 plus years removed from that, and your culture and your popular culture and your reference points are not the same as people in those days. So you don't have any of that nostalgic, sentimental kind of attachment to the times that the album came out. And I think when you hear people say things like, music in my day was so much better than it is now, what they mean is that the times that they grew up in were important to them, and the music of that time is the soundtrack of their lives. So that's really interesting. I think Maddy's got one last thing to say. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think like when you say that about it being like the time of when they grew up in, I think that's the only reason that mine probably is lower, because I don't think I have the emotional connection that most people do. Like to me, I just don't think I could form that with something unless, I don't know. I feel like for me, like to really, really enjoy something, I have to have some sort of relatability thing to it. I don't know. Sorry.
Well, we're going to find out more about this as we go on, because we're going to be listening to, I mean, the idea was that we would just listen to all those albums that everybody from a certain era absolutely loves, you know. So anybody who's watching this and listening to this now, we are going to touch on some absolute classic albums and some artists who are legendary and whose stories are really interesting. And it's going to be these guys, Maddy, Maya, Max, and Shane, who are going to be listening to that music, sometimes maybe for the first time. I'm sure there'll be some albums that we'll pick. In fact, it might be worth picking the next album and making sure that it's completely new to everybody. That might be an idea. In the meantime, I want to thank Maddy, Maya, Max, and Shane for taking part in this. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you out there for listening or for watching. Please give us your feedback. I'm going to do all the usual thing with, with Instagram, pages and Facebook pages, and so you can communicate with all the people taking part, and you can leave your comments. I'm sure everybody would be really, really interested to read and to hear them. Yeah, thank you very much. This has been really interesting, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, well, there we have it. That was really interesting. I hope you found that interesting too. We didn't even get a chance to talk about the conspiracy theories about Paul dying or any of those kind of things. Maybe we'll do a follow-up sometime. Well, the next album, I'm not sure whether I should tell you now what that's going to be or let you wait. It's one of my favourites. The next album that they're going to be looking at and listening to and giving their thoughts on is Hotel California by the Eagles, an album that I know really, really well, that I've been listening to since I was 14 or 15 years old. So please join us again. Oh, and by the way, follow us on Instagram, Yesterday&Today 9. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. I think we're probably going to have a Facebook page, so have a look for that as well. I'll try and put links in. And please stay with us on this journey. I think it's going to be really interesting, especially as we're going to hit lots of classic rock albums, but we're also going to go into jazz and fusion and soul and funk. So we're going to be listening to all those genres. And sometimes, occasionally, it might be the first time that our group of young people have actually heard those albums. Okay, thanks for joining us. Join us again. Please give us your views. Let us know what you think, and see you next time. Bye-bye.